The world is a really big place with a lot of really interesting personalities. At some point, we're going to have a dispute, and before we break into the ring and we start boxing it out with each other, playing MMA, so let's just take a breath and take a closer look at the ways we can handle disputes with neighbors. My name is Finney, and my passion is helping you make sense of real estate. If you need help finding a top agent near you, or if you simply want to drop me a line to say hello, my contact info is below. If you're new here, please go ahead and subscribe to this channel now and like this video. Thank you. All right, my friend, let's take a closer look at this. I'm sure that you can envision a time when you heard your neighbors outside yelling and screaming at each other, and you're wondering what the heck is going on. Or perhaps it was like midnight and you started hearing shouting right next door or broken glass, and you're wondering what the heck is going on over here. So obviously you might be having some neighbors fussing, you might have some neighbors feuding there, and we need to take a closer look so that we can all just simply take a breath to reassess, let calm minds prevail moving forward. The first way to handle dispute is deciding, is it really a problem to begin with? There is a big difference in between the people that might have a one-off occurrence, because none of us are perfect, right? All of us are going to tick somebody off at some point. We're all going to have that day when we do something that we probably shouldn't, and it's really not like we meant to do anything wrong to offend another person. But then we have the repeat offenders, those people that maybe constantly they're driving down your street and they're throwing out trash and littering your community, or they're constantly just making a nuisance, or perhaps they're just constantly being a nuisance because they're driving way too fast to the community. There might be little ones playing in the street. Whatever the situation, and we need to dial it back and reassess this whole situation from a safety perspective as well as a cleanliness perspective of your community, to decide whether it's a big issue or not. And when it's a one-off situation, to the repeat offender, it's the repeat offender that we definitely need to have a conversation with. The second thing that you want to do is to document their behavior. When we're talking about documenting the behavior, we want to take a look at each time this occurrence has happened to your knowledge that you have of the situation, right? So maybe in your observation period, you're like, hey, at 7 a.m. they drove by, they were going approximately 35 to 40 miles an hour. It's 15 miles an hour in our community. They almost hit somebody backing out of their driveway. On their way out of the community, they threw out a water bottle onto our community property, and write down the date and time and note it. The next thing that you want to do is do it again. Keep noting this behavior, keep noting the people, where they live, and everything else. I'm not saying be stalkerish in a way, but we do need to provide a record of this information if we truly want to have a conversation with somebody. It's not trying to invade somebody's freedoms, it's not trying to invade somebody's rights. But look, at the end of the day, if it's causing a quality of life issue to you and your neighbors, this is a really big problem, and it's not cool of them to be causing that big of problems in your community. By documenting the behavior, you'll have something to fall back on if you ever have to go to the police. Now, one thing to be completely honest and to keep in mind here is sometimes we are blind to our own faults, aren't we? So we want to be honest about what's an issue and what's not an issue. We want to be honest if we're being too particular and being too specific and picky, and what the difference is between being nitpicky and actually identifying a problem. I've given some more extreme occurrences that hopefully don't happen very often where you live, but obviously would cause a big discontent to a lot of people and their safety if they're almost getting ran over when this person drives down the street. So please don't be blind to your own ways, and make sure that when you're documenting someone's behavior, it's not because you have a personal tiff with them, but it's actually for a real cause. The third thing that you want to do is research the rules. Now, if you live in an HOA community, these rules were provided to you in what was called a resale package that contained your CC and Rs. CC and Rs being an acronym for covenants, codes, and restrictions. It would have also had a set of bylaws. So the rules of that community would be specifically and clearly written down within this pamphlet of information: your covenants, your codes, your restrictions, and your bylaws. So if the person in question is committing infractions against those rules, well, you clearly know what is right and what's wrong because it's written down. If you notice that it's wrong, then it's the time that you approach your HOA board or your HOA management company, and you let them know what the situation is and find out how they propose to rectify the situation. If you don't have an HOA, then you want to understand what are the city laws, county laws, or the laws that are governing the area that you reside, and what can someone do and what can't someone do. Now, obviously, if the posted speed limit in your community is 15 miles an hour and they're flying through at 35, 45, that's an infraction. That's a big problem, because 45 miles an hour is enough to kill somebody if you got hit by it. So we don't want that to happen to anyone in your community or anyone's children's or pets in the community as well. Make sure that you do your research on the local rules, whether you're in an HOA or in a non-HOA community, and understand what rules are governing during the area that you live in. The fourth thing that you want to do is find out what your neighbors have to say about them too, because there is strength and power in numbers. When one or more people are starting to say the same thing about the same person and are noticing a recurring trend, it will empower you whenever you take it to your HOA or if you have to take it to your local police department to help correct the situation. Find out what your neighbors are saying. This is also an extremely good check and balance to make sure that you're not being blind to your own ways, and also to make sure that your neighbors aren't being blinded to their own behavior patterns as well. It's a good time to have collective thought process, collective conversation to identify what is a meaningful problem compared to something that just isn't merited. Let's make sure that we're being real with ourselves, and let's find out what the neighbors have to say, keeping in mind their strength in numbers. The fifth thing that you want to do is to always have polite and direct conversation with the person that you have in mind. Obviously, you don't want to go, oh, they're all hostile because you've been sitting there fuming for days or weeks or even years over the issue, and by the time that you get over there, you're like, you know what, you need to knock this crap off. I told you. You need to knock this crap off, man. And they're like, what? You're at my front door and you want to start getting into an altercation, and what's the other person going to do? They're going to come out, who the heck do you think you are? And now you're going to be in this fisticuff situation, and people might as well pull up a video camera and start saying, hey, MMA in my community today, pay-per-view, $35, right? I mean, it's a little bit silly, it's a little bit extreme of an example, but it happens. Think about the last time you had an altercation with somebody and it was something that stuck with you and it was like really annoying and it just sat there and it festered, right? What happened? If you weren't polite and if you weren't direct and to the point about the situation, right? But first of all, what was the word? Polite. It led to an escalating situation. We don't want to escalate the situation. For all we know, the person doing it may not be paying attention or may not even be aware of what they're doing is wrong or see nothing wrong with it because that's how they grew up. It's the kind of person they are. There are so many different people out there. Sometimes they just need to be guided in the right direction. So by going over there and saying, hey, Andrew, you know, the other day, I noticed that you were going about 35 miles an hour down the street. I wasn't sure if you knew that it's 15 miles an hour in this community, in this neighborhood, and I noticed this has happened on quite a few times. Would you be so kind as to simply slow down because people are walking their dogs, they're walking with their kids, they're doing bicycle rides, and we don't want anyone to get hurt. Chances are Andrew would then turn around and say, hey, you know what? I didn't even realize it. I was in such a rush that day to get into the office or whatever I was doing. I didn't even think about it. I am so sorry about that. Thank you for bringing it to my attention. I promise I'll go ahead and knock it off, and I'll be more mindful to it going forward. But the approach, the delivery, the politeness and respect of another human being and respecting their rights and their privileges and freedoms as well is where a meaningful dialogue can happen. So we want to make sure that we're being realistic and approaching somebody in the polite and correct way by also being direct to the point of what the conversation is. The directness of that approach was talking about how fast they were going down the community street and making sure they were aware of what the posted speed limit was, right? So keep that in mind when you're having a conversation with your neighbor. Always be polite, always be respectful. They're people too with feelings and emotions. So we want to approach them from a place of respect and humility by just trying to address the situation with another human being before it escalates. Let's always keep out of escalating tensions and de-escalate the issue so that we can make sure that everybody is happy and comfortable and safe and sound in your community. The sixth thing that you want to do is hashtag JTAB, where hashtag JTAB is just take a breath to reassess and let cool, calmer minds prevail. The reason we want to do this is that when we get too much in a fluster, right, what happens? The blood just rushes into our head, it rushes through our body, we got this big surge of adrenaline, and we're like a gorilla getting ready to rip out of our body to go after somebody. Well, that leads to a confrontation. It could be in our inflection, it could be in our tonality, it can be in our micro expressions in our face by the way that we're looking at somebody. We could be scowling at somebody and trying to sound polite, be like, you know what, I am trying to be nice to you here. You ever have that person that says that? I'm trying to be polite, and they're about to jump out of their own skin. You're like, the words that you're saying don't match what you're doing, and I'm starting to get a little bit freaked out by you, to be honest, right? So just take a breath to reassess. When we let our mind cool down, we take that breath, what happens to our body is now the blood will start going back to where it's supposed to be. We can breathe in and we can just let ourselves cool off so that when we go have a conversation with a neighbor, we can say, hey, you know, this was something that I observed the other day. This is something that seems to have happened a few times, and I was wondering if you'd be so kind as to slow down the speed that you're going through our community, or if you'd be so kind to use the receptacles known as a trash bin on your property or throughout the community as you're tossing out trash. Please don't trash our community. It impacts all of our property value. If that's something that you'd be willing to do, that'd be great. Just wanted to bring it to your attention as a concerned neighbor. Is there anything that I can can do to help brighten your day or help out. I mean, there's nothing wrong by turning it back around and say, hey, what can I do to brighten your day? It's going to make somebody smile. It's going to make somebody happy. And it's going to take away some of the sting if you're calling out someone's behavior. But by cooling down and just taking a breath, we can have an open conversation that won't lead to a confrontation. The seventh thing that you want to do is have a compromise in mind. When we're talking about a compromise, obviously if they're doing something that's blatantly illegal, there is no compromise for something that's blatantly illegal. That's when the police and authorities need to get involved to address the situation. Now, when we're talking about a compromise, let's say that your neighbor has a couple of really beautiful dogs, and these beautiful dogs like to bark in the mornings or like to bark midday, as opposed to going over there and say, hey, you know what, Andrew, you gotta get rid of those dogs, which is obviously going to be highly offensive to a dog lover because their dogs are like our kids. I mean, let's face it, if you have pets, you know what I'm talking about. They're like your kids. They are your family here. That would be highly offensive if someone said, hey, you got to get rid of those dogs, and be like, oh, you got screaming kids, you need to go get rid of them. And then you can see how this could escalate and get put out of proportion. As opposed to going over there saying they got to get rid of their pets, then what you could suggest is, hey, you know what? I'm not sure if you realize, I know that you work a lot of hours and your dogs are over here barking that are normally barking like midday. Maybe they simply need some attention, and perhaps using an app like rover.com would be a good idea to get a dog walker to come over and walk your dogs every maybe 4 or 5 hours. Perhaps it would keep them happy, and perhaps it would keep them comfortable so they wouldn't be barking as much as they are. Would you be so kind to investigate that? I would say, hey, you know what? First of all, cool app there, rover.com. I will go ahead and look into that, and thank you for letting me know. Is there anything else I can do to help you today? So by having this type of a respectful dialogue, we can address the situation. There would be the compromise that would have been had. Obviously, somebody didn't have to get rid of their very much loved pets, and they could just simply hire a dog walker and everybody's happy. So it's something to consider, and it's something to think about. And the eighth thing you want to keep in mind is if you hit an impasse, then it's time to seek a third party, where that third party is a mediator or an ombudsman through an HOA company, or whatever the situation may be. Seek out the assistance of a third party. This is where it goes back to have a conversation with your neighbors, see what they're having to say about the same situation, same person, and see if it's actually a real recurring trending habit of that person. Seek out the help of a third party if you need to ensure that you're having a respectful dialogue, and if you have too big of an impasse, then it may be time to seek out the legal assistance of an attorney or pursue your options through the local police department, depending on how bad the infraction really is. Please consider your options wisely here, because ideally we can all come together because we're all stronger together than we are not, and by virtue of being human, we all are so much the same. I mean, think about it. If someone walked in my office right now and cut me, what color am I going to bleed? I'm going to bleed red. If somebody walks into someone else's office and cuts them, what color are they going to bleed? They're going to bleed red. It doesn't matter what our skin color is. It doesn't matter what our gender is, our sexual orientation, sexual preferences, religious preferences, or anything else. By virtue of being human, we're all much more alike than we are not. Please keep that in mind as you go about your day and think about the ways that we can improve our world together by starting with ourselves and improving ourselves moving forward. All right, so now that we know 8 ways to handle a dispute with a neighbor, let's take a closer look at the 7 qualities of a good neighbor and the 5 ways to get to know your neighbors. Looking forward to our next conversation. We'll see you in a few.